Hey guys. Tonight we step into a world where morning fog clings to your skin as you trudge along winding tributaries deep in the Amazon River Delta. You probably won't survive this, or at least that's what the mosquitoes seem to be whispering. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You splash forward, boots sinking into soggy clay, and the river's breath pulses against your cheek like a warm exhale. In this cradle of water and green, early delta dwellers carved out settlements on raised mounds, artificial hills, meant to keep their homes above seasonal floods. By around 400 CE, communities such as the Marajawara were already painting pottery in swirling reds and whites, leaving behind glimpses of a sophisticated society that thrived amid reeds and mangroves. You trace the edge of one mound, imagining children chasing iguanas through winding paths. Surely those lizards weren't part of any standardized math lesson, but hey, maybe they learned geometry by stalking their next crunchy snack. As you press closer, the scent of damp earth mingles with fermented manioc bread wafting from hidden storage pits. Mainstream scholarship agrees that manioc was a dietary cornerstone across Amazonia. Without it, these villages might have folded faster than a paper map in a monsoon. Yet local lore insists that giant river turtles once served as unwitting fairies carrying children across side channels as if they were living rafts. Though you still have to ask yourself whether that fringe tidbit is more myth than logistically sound. It would certainly make for a splashy family photo if you could get a turtle to pose. Further upstream, you spot the faint remains of a wooden walkway, beams rotted to charcoal against the silt. Long ago, these plank paths linked mound to mound, transforming murky wetlands into mini-city blocks. You imagine traders striding between neighbors, trading polished shells for clay figurines, shell necklaces that jingled louder than upbeat samba on carnival night. Historians still argue whether such raised causeways were purely functional flood defenses or part of some lost ritual labyrinth meant to guide spirits between worlds. Maybe both, but that debate only thickens the mystery. Every now and then, you pause to kick aside a writhing mass of roots that hug the water's edge. The forest here feels watchful, as if each vine and leaf is tracking your progress, ready to tickle your ankles the moment you falter. And falter you might. Those early settlers learned to navigate creeks by the position of overhead branches, using natural archways as waypoints. No GPS required, just a rudimentary but reliable mental map. Modern adventurers armed with satellite phones probably scoff at such low-tech survival, but in their day, that knowledge kept entire families from becoming fish food. A playful breeze sets dragonflies dancing above the water, their iridescent wings flickering like tiny stained glass windows. You reach a clearing where archaeologists have tent poles marking excavation grids, white labels fluttering like spectral butterflies. Under the soil, shards of painted pottery peek through each fragment, a testament to artistic flair and a life lived in harmony with water's whim. Local guides whisper that these shards can carry messages from ancestors if you hold them under moonlight, though you'll want to gauge that rumor's reliability before composing any midnight telegrams. Further in, you stumble across a line of upright palm trunks bleached by sun and months of rain. They once held up communal longhouses, roofed halls, where villagers gathered for feasts or to settle disputes. Imagine standing there drumming, echoing in your chest as elders chanted myths of river gods who weighed human hearts against barbs of flooded reeds. You might laugh at the theatrical flair, but those stories wove community bonds stronger than any concrete foundation could. Historians still argue whether such gatherings were strictly social or had deeper political undercurrents, perhaps forging alliances that shaped Delta power structures. By the time twilight approaches, you realize the river's current has carried you farther than you thought, every turn revealing another lost mound, another ghost town waiting for rediscovery. The water reflects a fading tangerine sky, and you can't help but think the delta itself is a living tapestry stitched together by watercourses and human ambition. Just remember that first mound you passed, carved by soil and sweat centuries ago, standing as a silent monument to resilience in a place where tomorrow's rain could swallow yesterday's work. A low croak rises from hidden frogs and the air quivers with life unseen. Perhaps a fitting reminder that although these cities vanish, their spirit still ripples through roots and currents. You stand on muddy ground, heart pounding, with the thrill of uncovering history's buried heartbeat. And in this moment, you realize that venturing into the Amazon Delta isn't just about lost settlements. It's about retracing footsteps that connect us all through time, one soggy step at a time. You push deeper into the jungle's green embrace, branches brushing your cheeks like playful hands as you enter what once was a canopy kingdom. Villages built high in sturdy trees to escape both floods and lurking predators. Remember that first mound you passed? Well, imagine swapping clay ramps for wooden ladders winding around massive trunks, each rung creaking under the weight of basket-laden villagers. Your palms press against damp bark, and you feel the pulse of life insects humming like hidden violins, leaves drifting down in slow-motion ballet. Mainstream archaeology confirms that these treetop settlements dating from around 700 CE were ingeniously constructed on platforms built atop ceiba and kapok trees, some reaching heights of 20 meters taller than a six-story building in your city back home. It's easy to picture families perched above water lines, sipping fermented palm wine while toddlers dangled their feet over the edge, convinced they were training for some prehistoric circus act. Side note: if toddlers existed back then, can you imagine how epic those snack time tantrums must have been? Between wooden planks, you peer down at the undergrowth, thick as soup. Locals still whisper of a fringe tale that birdsong was deliberately trained by village musicians using hollow gourds, an early attempt at wildlife karaoke. Perhaps. Though, that sounds like a tricky sound check. You grit your teeth if only to stop yourself from laughing at the mental image of toucans doing duets with human pipers. Historians still argue whether these audio experiments were spiritual offerings meant to ward off evil spirits or purely entertainment for rainy afternoons. Either way, it adds an extra layer of mystery, like Amazonian radio, where the only station is static and toucan shrieks. You edge along a swaying walkway, the boards giving gentle complaint underfoot, and you wonder if anyone ever got seasick on solid ground. Below you, a caiman's silhouette glides through shadowed water, reminding you that dining on banana chips up here comes with its own set of risk assessments. Still, elevated life had perks. Little scorpions and venomous spiders rarely ascended above 2 meters, so your ankles remained blissfully bite-free. You might crack a joke about installing trapdoors for unwanted guests, but perhaps that's pushing your canopy survival skills to comedic extremes. At the heart of the village, you find a circular clearing where a ring of slender pillars supports an octagonal hut, once the communal meeting hall. Today, vines drape like nature's curtains, and you half expect a troop of ghostly elders to rise and rerun an age-old council meeting. Mainstream sources note that such halls could host up to 200 occupants, making them the social media hubs of their time without Wi-Fi, but certainly with plenty of real-time gossip. You can almost hear a farmer mumble, "Did you hear about Marta's cassava collapse?" which probably ranks as the ancient equivalent of your neighbor's avocado toast disaster. Perched on one pillar, a handful of dried gourds lies in a neat row. Containers once filled with nightshade brews used in dusk rituals to commune with river spirits. Allegedly, shamans would sip the concoction until their vision blurred, leading to fringe rituals involving interpretive dance and synchronized frog croaking. You might smirk at the thought of frog-led choreography, but there's a strange beauty in imagining ritualistic performances under a moonlit canopy. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were purely medicinal rites for healing or elaborate community theater to strengthen social bonds. As usual, both explanations could be true. Behind the main hut, you find traces of smaller tree houses connected by narrow rope bridges that sag under the weight of time. These were likely children's quarters, a place where young ones practiced balance and bravery by racing tarantulas along the railing. Okay, maybe not tarantulas, but perhaps small lizards, which still counts as a questionable parenting strategy. The breeze here carries the faint aroma of burnt palm heart, evidence that villagers roasted core vegetables at smoky hearths ringed by river stones. Without modern ovens, this earthy salt and smoke combo probably tasted more adventure than your average grilled snack. In the distance, the faint outline of a triangular flag made from jaguar hide flaps in the wind, a symbol of clan identity. Each clan apparently had its own emblem. Some preferred turtle shell totems, others eagle feather standards like a lost Amazonian United Nations, where diplomacy involved sharing cocoa beans instead of coffee cups. You trace the jaguar's contours with your eyes, imagining that, to these villagers, wearing a jaguar's pelt meant channeling stealth and power. Though you suspect they also enjoyed the bragging rights at canopy potlucks. The under-canopy light shifts as the sun inches westward, casting lattice-like patterns through overlapping leaves onto your shoulders, proof that even 300 years ago, nature mastered hair and spotlight far better than any modern stage crew. You pause, inhaling the damp sweetness of decomposing leaves mixed with fresh blooms, a perfume impossible to replicate at your local florist. At that moment, a curious parrot screeches overhead, sounding like a disgruntled referee at a soccer match, prompting you to stifle a laugh so your exit doesn't disturb the ancient ambiance. As twilight seeps in, you realize the encroaching darkness will soon hide the rope bridges you've so carefully navigated. You cling to the last glimmers of a daylight, retracing your steps along the wooden pathways, one careful plank at a time. In the golden half-light, the village seems to pulse like a living organism. Each treehouse and beam synced in silent rhythm with humming insects and chattering monkeys. By the time your feet touch solid mulch-strewn ground again, the canopy kingdom has faded into shadows, and you're left with the echo of wooden creaks and distant water. An auditory postcard from a world suspended between earth and sky. As you brush leaves from your jacket, you feel a thrill not just from exploring an architectural marvel, but from realizing that up here, wood and water built more than homes. They crafted a culture perfectly tuned to the rhythms of river and rain. You slip through a curtain of trailing vines to stand before a series of monumental earthen mounds, their terraced sides rising like gentle pyramids from the flooded plains. You probably won't survive climbing them in flip-flops, but here you are anyway. These landforms, hewn by hands long forgotten, once towered up to 10 meters high, each layer packed with alternating clay and sand to withstand seasonal deluges. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You place a palm on the cool, packed clay and feel its quiet solidity. Mainstream archaeology tells us that these mounds, built between 600 and 1200 CE, served as both habitation platforms and sacred podiums for ceremonies honoring river gods. Just imagine chieftains in feathered regalia standing atop these terraces as drumming echoed below the rising river, reflecting torchlight like a flickering disco ball, ancient party vibes with slightly more snake handling. Yet fringe researchers propose that the architects of these earthworks encoded astronomical alignments into their constructions, lining mound faces with sun-baked markers to track solstices. Fancy saying, "My house faces the sunrise on the winter solstice." Historians still argue whether those alignments were intentional sky watching or mere byproducts of practical orientation. But it's tempting to believe your ancestors were early birdwatchers with a flair for landscape yoga. You begin your ascent, each step sinking slightly into packed layers. Halfway up, you step onto a flattened terrace where remnants of post holes hint at wooden structures once anchored there. Was that a daylight dining patio or an elevated market stall for trading bright green feathers? You run a finger along a broken post hole edge, brushing away silt to reveal a shard of pottery painted with spirals and fish motifs, the local equivalent of Instagram-worthy crockery minus the influencer fees. Pausing to catch your breath, you squint at the view. Endless water channels cut through emerald marsh, each channel snaking toward the main river like tributary veins. You might crack a joke about your Google Maps pin showing lost city of Marshville, but this was anyone's address millennia ago. The horizon wavers in heat haze, and you feel both dwarfed and exalted by the scale of these constructions, giant cake tiers frosted with cunning engineering. Reaching the summit, you discover a flat plaza where scattered stones form a rough circle, perhaps a sunken courtyard for communal rites. Imagine villagers gathering to exchange cassava cakes, while a troupe of dancers in jaguar masks performed under woven palm leaf canopies. Scholars still argue whether these central plazas doubled as grain storage arenas or open-air theaters for epic storytelling. Either way, the complexity rivals any modern stage. A sudden breeze carries the sweet tang of wild papaya blossoms, mingling with the earthy scent of trampled grass. You lean against a solitary stump, reflecting on how these mounds were maintained generation after generation, layer by layer, like chapters in an unwritten book. The labor investment must have been astronomical. No power tools, no hydraulic excavators. Just a human tide of baskets, shoveling soil, each basket a tiny vote in an act of collective monument building. Just below the summit, you notice a shallow cavity filled with small, polished stones, perhaps a votive deposit left by pilgrims seeking blessings for abundant fish runs. Fringe whispers recount that submerged caves beneath some mounds linked to underworld voyages and shamanic rituals involved diving into mud-choked caverns to retrieve messages from spirit guides. Historians still argue whether such explorations were literal spelunking or metaphorical journeys in trance states. And with these mosquitoes, you might embrace trance as a viable coping strategy. You start your descent mindful of slippery footprints carved into the clay, each one a testament to countless seekers who climb these terraces over centuries. As you reach the base, a sudden splash ripples across a nearby lagoon, revealing the slick back of a giant catfish, nature's reminder that in this delta water reigns supreme and even earthen citadels bow to its tides. Backing away, you glance once more at the mound's layered sides, wondering what conversations took place here, the political intrigues over fishing rights, the lullabies whispered to newborns as canoes drifted past, or the midnight councils plotting to divert a flood's course. The soil under your feet seems to murmur with these untold stories, inviting you to listen closely. A lone heron lifts off from the mound's edge, wings unfurling like parchment pages turning in a breeze. You watch it arc across fading light, carrying with it the promise of renewal and the quiet persistence of life. Even as civilizations rise and fall, the mound endures, a testament to human ingenuity and stubborn hope. With dusk approaching, you step away, letting the mound's silhouette dissolve into a tapestry of shadows and whispers. And as you walk on, you carry its layered memory within you, each step echoing the labor, devotion, and mystery that built an empire of earth in a land ruled by water and wonder. You settle into a dugout canoe, its hull hollowed from a single tree trunk, and push off into the delta's winding waterways. The paddle slices the water with a soft hiss, and you drift along canoe highways older than Rome's roads. Arteries linking mound to mound, where traders once navigated rapids and calm alike in search of rare commodities. Mainstream research tells us that by 900 CE, these river routes formed vast exchange networks spanning hundreds of kilometers, ferrying cassava animal skins and colorful feathers between settlements. Imagine handing off a bundle of manioc at dawn and receiving turtle shells by dusk, a logistical marvel accomplished without a single paved road. As you float, the canopy overhead filters sunlight into shifting emerald patterns that dance across your arms. You can't help but smirk when you recall that these waterways served as Amazonia's original highways, though without rest stops offering kombucha or air conditioning. If you thought rush hour traffic is bad, try sidestepping a pod of giant otters sharing your lane. Those sleek swimmers take to a whole new level. The scent of wet bark and ripening fruit hangs in the air, mingling with distant calls of howler monkeys that sound like disgruntled referees at a soccer match. You grin at the thought of river gods scratching their heads at early canoe customs. Ritual, cleansings, canoe baptisms, and even fringe tales of shamans who painted their vessels with hallucinogenic pigments to tune into the river's soul. Historians still argue whether those vibrant dyes served a spiritual purpose or simply brightened up an otherwise muddy commute. Gliding under a canopy arch, you spot faded white markings on exposed roots, ancient navigation symbols guiding paddlers toward hidden rapids or safe harbors. It's like the earliest form of Jeepal Great Paddle System. You paddle closer to trace one symbol resembling an arrow flecked with fish scale patterns, likely a signpost indicating the richest fishing grounds downstream. Local legend claims that following these glyphs at night under a full moon could summon schools of catfish to swarm your nets, though that might be optimistic if you'd rather avoid a midnight fish frenzy. A gentle current nudges your canoe toward a bustling riverside market, once alive with barter and banter. You imagine traders unloading kila of smoked fish in exchange for woven baskets brimming with dye plants deep reds to stain ceremonial cloths blues for body paint before celebratory dances. One fringe account even suggests some groups traded live river dolphins as tokens of prestige. Though fabricating a dolphin transport company through rapids sounds logistically challenging at best. You pause midstream to scoop up a handful of water, watching debris swirl, a reminder that rivers bear both bounty and risk. Mainstream evidence shows Delta traders often carried protective talismans, carved stone amulets depicting jaguars or caimans, believing these symbols would ward off accidents or hostile tribes encountered along the route. You might joke about trading in life jackets the size of turtle shells, but the original bundles of woven palm fronds and bark held real cultural weight. Ahead, the canal widens into a confluence where three tributaries meet beneath a canopy tunnel. You steer toward a carved wooden pole inscribed with a spiral motif, perhaps marking a toll point where canoe crews paid tribute before entering another clan's territory. Early Delta kingdoms taxed river traffic, enforcing fees in the form of fish oils or handcrafted ornaments. This wasn't chokehold toll booths with flashing lights, but the exchange felt equally obligatory. Smile, offer a painted shell, and paddle on. Historians still argue whether these customs were primarily economic controls or elaborate hospitality rituals designed to honor visitors. The water's mirror-like surface reflects hanging vines and distant mounds rising above flooded plains. You lean back, letting the canoe drift as you soak up the scenery. A passing cargo canoe bumps yours gently. No honking horn, just mutual nods before each skims off in opposite directions. Tribal semaphores. Maybe. Traders likely signaled with feathered flags or sticks dipped in colored clay, communicating messages like shoals ahead or feast tonight. Fringe accounts of paddle-based semaphore systems rival semaphore flag manuals from Napoleon's-era. Historians still argue whether such signaling was standardized or improvised on the spot. Your stomach rumbles in protest, reminding you that river-bound life demanded regular fuel stops. You drift toward an overhanging lip of rock where roasted plantains cool on a carved stone ledge, evidence of frequent canoe-side snack breaks. Without modern convenience stores, paddlers relied on riverside foraging, wild bananas, nut clusters, and freshwater shrimp skewered on palm spines for quick protein hits. Imagine offering these to passing traders as impulse purchases. Get your shrimp skewers while they're hot. Though early marketers likely pitched deals more subtly, perhaps through rhythmic drum beats and rhythmic chants. The current shifts, urging you toward a narrower channel flanked by thick underbrush. You slow to avoid snagging your paddle on submerged roots, recalling tales of ghost barges gliding through at midnight, crewed by restless spirits seeking to reclaim lost cargo. That fringe narrative adds a chill as you hug the bank, imagining pale surfers drifting past beneath moonless skies. Historians still argue whether such specters were spectral warnings of treacherous currents or imaginative campfire stories to keep children from wandering too far. At the channel's end, you spy a line of stilted platforms where traders once moored their canoes. Crude docks built from hardwood poles sunk into the mud. The platforms stand empty now, vines reclaiming every surface, but you can almost hear the creak of paddles being hauled ashore and the chatter of deal-making voices echoing off the water. As you step onto a rickety board, you feel an odd mix of connection and loss. This was commerce in its purest form, driven by necessity and ingenuity long before electronics conquered every industry. You pause to take in the scene. Ancient docks, labyrinthine channels, and drifting clouds reflected in dark water. It hits you that despite modern highways and shipping lanes, these delta routes laid the blueprint for community exchange and culture, all achieved with nothing more than wooden planks, paddles, and audacious human spirit. With a final glance at the riverside market's moss-covered ruins, you hoist your canoe back into the main artery and prepare to continue downstream. Each paddle stroke a link in a chain spanning centuries and countless untold stories. You emerge from the tangled undergrowth into a clearing where the skeletons of ancient structures jut through thick curtains of vines and bromeliads, their stone foundations half swallowed by carpeted moss. These are the lost architectural marvels of the Delta Plaza's edges and raised causeways that defy easy explanation. You step carefully over collapsed columns and don't stumble on any snakes. Today's small miracle yet. Each moss-slick block whispers of grand plazas once echoing, with chants and market haggles. Mainstream surveys date these edifices to around 1000 CE, crediting a coordinated urban plan that far outstripped the random clustering of most jungle settlements. You run a hand along a carved threshold, tracing geometric motifs that mirror river eddies, fascinating symmetry between water's perpetual swirl and stone's frozen snapshot. Fringe aficionados, though, insist these patterns encode a calendar system much like Mayan stelae, marking lunar cycles for agricultural timing. Historians still argue whether the motifs served ritualistic timekeeping or were purely decorative testaments to masterful artisanship, but both possibilities spill extra intrigue into every chiseled groove. Ahead, a raised causeway, once a grand boulevard, extends toward another cluster of pillars. Its surface, now a fractured mosaic of stone and lichen, must have gleamed under ceremonial torchlight, guiding participants to sacred assemblies. Imagine torchbearers marching in solemn procession, their footsteps echoing against polished stone, while nearby dancers in feathered headdresses moved in synchronized patterns. You can almost hear distant rattlesnakes, well, maybe not actual snakes, but the jangling of anklets made from seed pods, adding a percussive soundtrack to the spectacle. Wandering onto a sunken plaza, you find 3 parallel stone benches etched into the ground. These could have held council members, or perhaps they were spectator seats for competitive games akin to early football matches minus the referee's whistle. Local lore claims these benches were once painted vibrant red with clay mixed from nearby riverbanks, an extravagant flourish that must have vanished under centuries of rain and vine overgrowth. You imagine the laughter of children playing chase along the plaza's edges, weaving between adult legs as their parents debated trade tariffs on smoked tapir meat. Just beyond you discern the stub of what appears to be a ceremonial staircase. Its steps, gouged by erosion, rise toward a collapsed gateway, adorned with a carving of a stylized jaguar head. This gateway likely marked the transition from public to sacred space, the threshold where commoners paused, left offerings, and entered a realm of priestly power. Fringe speculation suggests that priests here used reflective obsidian mirrors to channel sunlight into underground chambers. Early light shows for divine messages. Historians still argue whether obsidian sourced from Andean highlands actually made it this far south or if traders substituted river pebble glass instead. You circle an open courtyard framed by stone pillars, each pillar crowned with faint traces of painted stucco. The colors have long since faded, but you can almost sense the aura of turquoise and ochre that once brightened the scene. The courtyard's center holds a pit lined with river stones, perhaps an altar for animal sacrifices, though local elders scoff at that grim vision, insisting instead it was used to roast giant river turtles during communal feasts. Whether sacrificial pit or communal barbecue, the stone floor still bears scorch marks as if stone chefs once flipped turtle steaks under the same sun, now peeking through drifting clouds. A narrow stone corridor leads away from the plaza, its ceiling fallen in places replaced by crisscrossed branches overhead. You crouch to pass beneath a lintel carved with spirals and fish scales, reminiscent of coiled anaconda symbols of both life and danger. Mainstream archaeologists suggest this corridor funneled ritual participants through a liminal space, heightening anticipation before a ceremony. Fringe voices offer a wilder theory. They believe the corridor amplified chanting through natural acoustics, producing trance-inducing echoes. Historians still argue whether the primary function was acoustic design or merely architectural necessity in tight quarters. Beyond the corridor, you find an octagonal foundation ringed by 8 truncated columns. Could this have been an astronomical observatory? You align yourself to mark the sunset, noting that one column aligns directly with the sun's last sliver behind a distant mound. Eerie precision. Yet another theory proposes that each column represented a cardinal direction infused with mythic significance, guiding travelers through metaphysical journeys as much as physical ones. Scholars still debate which explanation best fits the evidence, leaving you to relish the ambiguity etched in stone. Your path leads to a tiered platform where a lone stone basin sits at the top. The basin is carved with concentric rings, and when you pour a trickle of water into it, you watch ripples spread perfectly round before spilling over. Maybe this was a water clock measuring time by the steady drip, a technological marvel predating medieval European clocks. Fringe enthusiasts leap at this interpretation. Mainstream researchers caution that it might simply have been a ritual cleansing font. Historians still argue, but the tactile pleasure of watching ripples circle remains undeniable. You wander outward, skirting foundations half drowned in moss until you reach a final open area where heavy stone door frames stand askew. Once massive wooden doors studded with bone or shell barred entry to this inner sanctum. Now, those doors lie buried beneath centuries of leaf litter, leaving only the silent promise of hidden chambers below. Turn over a stone and you might glimpse the lip of a staircase descending into darkness, though most explorers wisely avoid that plunge without reliable lighting and a robust survival guide. As you step away from these ruinous halls, you glance back at the vine-draped columns reaching skyward like ancient sentinels keeping watch. The air smells of damp limestone and decomposing vine, a scent as evocative as any perfume. With one last look, you let the jungle reclaim its cover mentally, bookmarking each carved threshold and sunken plaza as testaments to architectural genius and the mysteries still buried beneath. You step onto a narrow earthen path leading onward, feeling strangely buoyed by the solidity of stone under your boots. These lost structures may never fully reveal their secrets, but for now, they stand as moss-wrapped monuments to human creativity, inviting you and countless others to return again. Chisel in spirit and wonder in heart. You approach a half-buried scatter of glossy black fragments, obsidian shards glinting like spilled night on the forest floor as you trace your fingers along their razor-sharp edges. These volcanic glass tools imported over vast distances were prized across the delta around 1100 CE, carving both everyday implements and ritual artifacts. Mainstream studies confirm that obsidian came from Andean highland sources transported via intricate river trading networks spanning more than 1,500 kilometers, no small feat, in dugouts and reed rafts. The mere presence of these dark blades reveals how far Delta societies reached in pursuit of superior cutting edges, their value rivaling that of precious metals in other cultures. You gather a few fragments in your palm and feel the surprising weight of history tingling in your fingertips. Fringe lore insists that shamans ground obsidian into fine powder, mixing it with plant resins to create mystical ink for marking skins during sacred ceremonies. An early form of body art meant to rewrite a person's fate. It's a vivid image villagers lined up for spiritual tattoos, under flickering torchlight inks absorbing moonbeams to reveal hidden prophecies. Historians still argue whether obsidian markings functioned as personal protection talismans or served purely as status symbols for an appointed elite. Either way, the debate adds an electric charge to each smooth piece you touch. You stand amid a shallow quarry where locals once chipped away at bedrock deposits to harvest obsidian, each napped flake a testament to precise craftsmanship. The ground is littered with rejected cores and broken tools, evidence of trial and error mastery. Imagine artisans hunched over sharp-edged flakes, striking at precise angles to produce spear points that could pierce turtle shell or crack open palm nuts with surgical precision. Such workshop waste piles rival any modern scrapyard, albeit with a haunting elegance, black glass fragments shimmering under dappling sun. A breeze rustles overhead, carrying the faint aroma of scorching wood from distant hearth glows. You follow it to a secluded clearing where a shallow pit hosts a stone basin. Residue stains ring the basin's lip, a dark tar-like film that scientists suspect is ground obsidian mixed with fish oil used to lubricate ritual blades or paint ceremonial masks. Fringe enthusiasts claim that these masks, when worn, enable participants to glimpse the spirit world. One cracked mask shard, even found nearby, bears an uncanny resemblance to a jaguar's snarling visage. Historians still argue whether such masks were worn during trance inductions or reserved for theatrical pageantry, but either scenario conjures vivid midnight performances in moss-draped groves. You lift a sharply angled flake and marvel at its balance so thin it glows when held to sunlight like a shard of the eclipse itself. Carving flesh and wood with equal ease, these obsidian blades lent Delta healers unprecedented precision. Mainstream ethnobotanical sources note that such tools were employed for minor surgical tasks, draining abscesses or excising infected tissue. Picture a healer brandishing a gleaming blade to slice away a thorn or infected wound, saving a villager from fever, long before hypodermic needles or antiseptics. Community trust in these healers was immense. One slip could spell tragedy, so mastery of obsidian crafting was both art and life or death skill. Nearby, a carved wooden totem stands guard, its figure clutching an obsidian dagger against a shell heart. You run a finger over weathered grooves, feeling how artisans aligned the totem's blade with the rising sun on equinox mornings, an intentional nod to renewal and balance. Fringe commentators leap at this alignment, arguing that the totem served as a solar calendar mark, indicating optimal dates for harvesting medicinal plants. Historians still argue whether these alignments stemmed from sophisticated sky watching or coincidental placement guided by topography, but either way, evidence of celestially tuned craftsmanship stirs the imagination. A low hum drifts through the trees, the chorus of cicadas and frogs in nocturnal symphony, and you crouch to watch obsidian flakes catch the last golden rays. You wonder if local chefs ever used smaller obsidian blades to fillet fish, with pinpoint accuracy preparing tacos Delta-style centuries before tortillas became a trending fusion snack. The idea of obsidian sushi in the jungle sparks a grin. Fringe tales even describe ceremonial feasts where fish were so thinly sliced they appeared translucent under torchlight like edible stained glass. Wandering into a narrow passage carved through a rocky outcrop, you spy wall grooves where obsidian blades were once tested on hard stone, calibrating edge retention and angle. Such an on-site quality control station underscores the premium placed on tool performance, speaking volumes about a society that valued efficiency and precision. Historians still argue whether these testing benches doubled as teaching spaces for apprentices or formed part of communal workshops where skills were openly shared. The absence of permanent structures suggests pop-up ateliers that sprung up wherever the best obsidian veins were found. You rise to your feet, shaking off leaf litter bristling with tiny glass slivers. Always check your socks later. Ahead, a ring of upright basalt stones encloses a circular sunken space. This local storyteller's claim was a blade theater where master nappers demonstrated techniques under moonlight audiences, encircling the ring as each strike sent tiny sparks flying. Historians still argue if such gatherings were purely instructional or evolved into ritualized spectacles blending craft and performance. Either way, the concept of glass flake fireworks shows feels apropos for an Amazonian night. Suddenly, a howler monkey's roar reverberates through the canopy, a deep baritone that echoes like a guardian announcing your presence. You pack away your obsidian finds and flash a wry smile in a world built on water and earth. Here is the element of fire's frozen art. Obsidian melding with molten lava's ancient fury. You imagine the full-cycle volcanic eruptions forging glass river traders ferrying it downstream, and delta artisans transmuting it into tools of ritual survival and art. Before straying onward, you leave a small obsidian flake atop one carved stone, an anonymous offering to whichever spirits still linger in this place. Then you stand brushing dust from your hands and look back on the quarry pit's glossy mirror shards. Each fragment glints like a secret waiting to be pried wide open, revealing stories of distant volcanoes, long river voyages, and the deft hands that shaped history in glass. With the moon beginning its rise, you step away from the obsidian cache, senses alive to the interplay of light, shadow, and memory. And as you continue your journey, the blade's whisper stays with you, a reminder that every fragment of lost society can cut deep into the heart of wonder. You slip away from the main current into a narrow side channel shrouded by overhanging foliage, the canoe's bow parting water so silently that even the fish below seem startled into stillness. Here, these sheltered waterways once served as sacred paths, where villagers glided in hushed reverence to commune with river deities. Mainstream ethnographies report that by 950 CE ritual, canoe processions occurred monthly, under lunar transitions, honoring Yanakuri, the so-called black water spirit, believed to guide fish to fishermen's nets. You drift beneath entwined branches, half expecting ghostly paddlers trailing behind you, though today the only followers are curious catfish inspecting your hull. As you navigate, the air cools and the usual soundtrack of insect buzz gives way to the soft drip of water from leaf tips. Quirky local lore insists that shamans once carved tiny masks from palm nuts, tying them to prow tips to speak for the canoe, like having a built-in Amazon Alexa minus the questionable privacy policy. You chuckle imagining a mask proclaiming "play ambient frog symphony." Historians still argue whether these figureheads were chiefly ornamental or functional spirit intermediaries, but either way they lent processions an eerie theatrical flair that no modern theme park could match. You drift under a natural arch of roots, where sunlight filters through in emerald beams, spotlighting floating lilies that glow like waterborne lanterns. The lilies were revered mainstream botanists. Note that their pollen was gathered for fragrant offerings strewn atop earthen altars to placate flood deities. You can almost smell powdered lily dust drifting through the air, sort of like jasmine-scented confetti for river gods. Fringe enthusiasts maintain that ingesting a drop of lily-infused water induced mild visions akin to sipping a botanical chamomile tea strong enough to send you on a psychic road trip. Historians still debate whether these visions were side effects of pollen allergy or deliberate mind-altering rituals, but either scenario adds a layer of sensory intrigue to the reed's whisper. A gentle breeze stirs ripples across the channel's glassy surface, reflecting pyramid mounds behind you. You lean forward to slip a cupped hand into the water, feeling the temperature shift, a ritual test perhaps to discern the river's mood. Mainstream accounts describe priestesses performing the same gesture, judging whether to proceed with ceremonial chants or postpone until calmer waters returned. You grin, thinking how your weather app pales in comparison to this intuitive hydrology, though it might be less messy to check forecasts on your phone. Ahead, you spy a submerged stone circle columns, sunk into the channel bed, their tops just visible beneath churning eddies. These submerged pillars marked the precise spot where rituals commenced. Canoes would encircle them 3 times in silence, echoing the river's own circular courses. Fringe storytellers claim that completing the triple loop under a waning moon summoned spectral light beneath the canoe's hull, illuminating submerged carvings of serpent gods. Historians still argue whether accounts of luminous undercurrents stem from bioluminescent algae sightings or imaginative retellings, but the idea of a ghostly river glow certainly heightens the mystery. You carefully guide your canoe through the pillar circle, your paddle quiet against polished stone, and imagine chanting voices rising in harmony as carved effigies of river guardians glimmer beneath murky depths. It feels oddly like participating in an age-old silent disco, though without headphones or EDM, and you wonder what rhythm guided their chants. Perhaps the steady lap of waves or the distant drumming of earth itself, resonating through water. Emerging from the circle, you notice fresh palm frond offerings tied to low branches, handfuls of cassava cakes, feather bundles and carved shells left by modern devotees continuing an ancestral tradition. It seems people still seek the river's favor, whether for abundant fish, safe travels, or relief from headaches. You glance at the pastel cakes bobbing in the current, a silent testament to continuity. Though centuries have passed, the river's voice remains potent enough to inspire daily devotion. As you drift on, the channel narrows further and you brush aside thick vines to reveal a hidden alcove where moss-draped stones form a miniature shrine. A shallow basin carved from a single boulder holds a pool of emerald water, its surface motionless as glass. Mainstream archaeological reports document similar shrines along tributary sites where pilgrims pause to purify their hands and hearts before deeper journeys. Imagine the hushed hush of hands dipping into sacred water, each ripple a silent prayer echoing into the jungle's hush. Fringe tales ramp up the drama. They claim that at midsummer solstice, celestial alignments cast a shaft of sunlight through a particular gap in the foliage, illuminating the basin and revealing inscriptions of lost prayers. Historians still argue whether such precise alignments were engineered or coincidental, though you can't deny the poetic allure of a sunbeam spotlighting ancient script nature's own theater production. You bow your head, scooping a handful of water and letting droplets fall onto your brow, an impromptu blessing from the spirit realm. The chill against your skin sends a shiver of reverence through you. Modern skeptics might dismiss the gesture as souvenir superstition, yet you find yourself rooted in tradition feeling a surprising kinship with ancestors who performed the very same act. Leaving the alcove, you steer toward a widening bend, where painted canoe prows lie stranded on sandbars once vibrant with red and white motifs symbolizing life and death. Grounded now, these hull remnants resemble fossilized whales, silent witnesses to processions that coursed these channels for centuries. You run fingertips over flaking paint, imagining the original artists mixing botanical pigments on the riverbank, earthy reds from clay-stark whites from crushed shell. Researchers still argue whether these color schemes denoted clan identity or reflected allegiances to specific deities. Perhaps they served both functions in a fluid blend of politics and piety. A loud splash interrupts your thought as a river otter pops its head up, inspecting you with curious amber eyes. The creature regards you as if judging your ritual credentials, then submerges, leaving concentric rings that ripple across the silvered surface. You can't help but laugh. Even the river's wildlife seems invested in your performance. As the side channel bends back toward the main river, you take one last look at the collapsed shrines drifting lilies and moss-swathed stones. Here in this hushed tributary, the boundary between human and divine past and present feels exquisitely blurred. You would normally crack a quip about spiritual Uber service, but the solemn hush steals your punchline, leaving only a soft smile as you rejoin the bustling current. With paddle in hand, you steer back to deeper water, the memory of sacred processions lingering as you merge onto the river's grand stage. The channel's whisper fades behind you, but the echo of ritual water offerings and carved effigies will follow in every paddle stroke, reminding you that in the delta the divine glides just beneath the surface of the everyday. You step into a sun-dappled clearing where the air hangs thick, with the scent of blooms you can't immediately name, tall, spindly stalks crowned with pale lavender flowers and broad-leafed plants exuding a honeyed warmth. This was once the heart of the Delta's legendary botanical gardens, lost orchards, cultivated not for fruit but healing. Mainstream botanical surveys confirm that these transplant gardens flourished from around 800 CE, featuring dozens of endemic species, later traded far beyond the region. Villagers bred medicinal herbs with almost obsessive care, coaxing potent salves to treat fevers, wounds, and mysterious riverborne ailments. As you brush aside a frond of glistening leaves, you catch sight of an overturned clay jar, its rim stained with deep green residue. Fringe botanists claim this was chlorophyll-infused poultice, used in ceremonial eyewash rituals believed to sharpen vision for nocturnal hunts. You imagine squinting at moonlit vines waiting for prey's silhouette to dance against swamp shadows, though peering through lettuce-bright goggles might not improve your aim. Historians still argue whether these poultices were strictly functional medicine or performative rites to honor forest deities. Either interpretation adds a vibrancy to each crushed leaf you study. You kneel beside a raised trench lined with smooth river stones, once a prototype greenhouse engineered to channel groundwater and trap humidity. Archaeological reconstructions indicate villagers built these trenches to cultivate tender seedlings of Uncaria tomentosa, the cat's claw vine prized for its anti-inflammatory properties. Local legend insists that shamans harvested cat's claw only on stormy nights, believing thunderbolts imprinted extra potency into the bark. Whether weather dictated harvest timing or opportunistic storytellers embellish the practice, the notion of lightning-fortified medicine certainly speaks to a culture in dialogue with its wild elements. Leaning in, you gingerly crush a single petal from a small purple blossom, likely a variety of ayahuasca shrub unrelated to its hallucinogenic Amazonian cousins. The faint, citrusy fragrance rises in a heady wave, causing your nostrils to flare in delight. Mainstream ethnobotanists note that this fragrance served as an early form of aromatherapy used in steamy sweat lodges to open airways and clear respiratory congestion. You almost expect modern spas to adopt Amazonian steam and sniff therapy, though the idea of trading eucalyptus for jungle blooms would surely tempt adventurous wellness bloggers. Behind you, a gnarled tree trunk supports a lattice of vines draped like botanical chandeliers, each vine bearing curious seed pods shaped like elongated teardrops. You pluck one pod, cracking it open to reveal clusters of vivid orange seeds flecked with dark speckles. Fringe herbalists claim these seeds were crushed into a paste used as early sunscreen, an ironic companion to ancient crocodile dung lotions. Historians still argue whether seed paste sunscreen saw widespread use or was limited to elite hunters and canoe captains, but the concept of plant-based sun protection underscores the Delta's innovative, all-natural lifestyle. Nearby, you discover a shallow basin carved into a rock, its surface encrusted with mineral salts and residue, evidence of early distillation techniques. Researchers propose this was used to separate essential oils from crushed leaves, yielding potent tinctures applied directly to wounds. You can almost see a healer stirring a smoky flask of resinous vapor, inhaling deeply before painting medicine onto a bark-bandaged arm. Fringe accounts claim some tinctures glowed faintly under starlight, a side effect attributed to trace bioluminescent algae in the water source. Historians still debate whether such luminous remedies existed or were narrative embellishments, but you find yourself imagining the gentle glow guiding midnight healing circles. You rise and follow a narrow footpath weaving through a riot of oversized ferns and curly-leafed shrubs. The path leads to a circle of upright poles wrapped in dried vines, once the supports for woven shade cloths that protected delicate seedlings from midday scorch. The shade houses likely hosted slow-growing orchids prized for both ornamental value and rumored aphrodisiac qualities. Local folklore claims that wearing an orchid petal behind the ear granted charismatic speech during council meetings, effectively an ancient PR strategy. Historians still argue whether orchids served diplomatic functions or were merely status symbols flaunted by the wealthy. Either way, these shade houses evoke a sophisticated understanding of microclimates. In the center of the shade circle, a low earthen mound dotted with holes holds water-filled terracotta pots, each pot incubating larvae of medicinal mosquitoes bred to deliver healing proteins via microbites. Okay, maybe that fringe claim is a stretch. There's scant evidence mosquitoes were anything but pests. Yet inventive Delta healers certainly experimented with leech-like creatures for bloodletting, suggesting a willingness to explore unconventional vectors for medicine. Historians still argue whether aquatic leeches played formal roles in their pharmacopoeia or were begrudgingly tolerated nuisances, but the image of controlled leech therapy in a garden setting lingers like a vivid aftertaste. Ahead, you arrive at a mossy log where roots twist into a natural bench. You sit inhaling the combined chorus of floral scents, peppery mint, lemony basil leaves, and a faintly sweet note you can't place. Mainstream records enumerate more than 40 plant species cultivated here. Yet scholars still debate whether these gardens were open to all community members or reserved for priestly castes. The egalitarian in you hopes for shared access, but the gardener's temperament might have enforced stricter membership. Imagine applying for horticultural guild status in the 9th century. As the sun dips lower, you notice shadows stretching across the floral tapestry patterns, shifting like living mosaics. A sudden rustle to your right reveals a cluster of iridescent beetles perched on a flower head, perhaps drawn by nectar, perhaps by the floral breeding experiments once conducted here. Fringe naturalists argue that such beetles were trained to pollinate specific orchids, a primitive form of beekeeping tailored for jungle environments. Historians still argue whether intentional insect training occurred or if pollination networks remained organic, but either interpretation underscores the delta's deep botanical sophistication. Rising from the log bench, you stretch and brush seed dust from your pants. The clearing feels sacred, a living pharmacy where human curiosity met nature's generosity. Stepping out of the garden, you glance back at the riot of greenery, each leaf a chapter in an unwritten medical compendium, each bloom a petal in a forgotten fairy tale of healing. As you continue onward, you carry with you a heady sense of possibility, wondering which modern cures might trace their lineage back to these delta laboratories of green wonder. You emerge at a broad river bend, just as dawn's pale light slips through mist, imagining European sails dotting the horizon for the first time. Outsiders who would stumble upon grand delta cities and struggle to interpret their purpose. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore First Contact. Picture a bearded navigator, compass in hand, steering a creaking caravel into calm waters, the hull's white sails flapping like startled seabirds. In 1542, Francisco de Orellana ventured down the Amazon in search of El Dorado, expecting streets paved with gold, yet encountering sprawling mounds and stone plazas instead. His chroniclers wrote of cities as large as Seville, though they couldn't fathom these weren't abandoned Spanish towns, but remnants of a civilization molded by rivers. Mainstream accounts confirm Orellana's amazement at earthen works he described, encountering roads and buildings amid the jungle, assuming them Silk Road curiosities transported from Europe. Historians still argue whether his reports exaggerated scale for patron appeal or faithfully recorded genuine wonders, but either way, his words ignited Europe's dream of jungle empires. As you stand on the riverbank, you feel the brush of humid air thickening around you, imagining the first startled villagers glimpsing strange ships and armor-clad strangers. These initial encounters, recorded in scratchy journals, tell of exchanges where beads and iron knives were traded for cassava bread and pottery shards. Native canoers proficient in delta navigation likely guided Europeans through labyrinthine channels, though they probably didn't mention the sacred side paths reserved for ritual processions. Fringe scholars suggest that some guides intentionally led foreign crews astray into dead-end tributaries as a warning. Respect our waterways or prepare to paddle in circles. Historians still argue whether such misdirections were strategic defense tactics or simple wayfinding errors in the dense maze. You wander to a rusted iron chain partially unearthed by shifting sands, likely part of a European anchor left behind when currents forced an impromptu departure. Holding the cold link, you imagine the frantic scramble as crew abandoned heavy gear to escape encroaching tides and hostile wildlife. Mainstream maritime historians note that early voyages often jettisoned cargo to lighten vessels in shallow rapids, but fringe enthusiasts whisper tales of anchors sinking into hidden pits set by locals to trap intruders. Regardless, that single iron ring now lies inert, a silent testament to cross-cultural encounters fraught with misunderstanding. Nearby, a half-buried glass bottle catches the sun, its sides etched with a faint crest, perhaps once containing wine or medicinal tonic for scurvy. You lift it carefully, noting the delicate green tint that catches refracted light like a gemstone. Picture a ship's surgeon, dispensing diluted mixtures to ward off disease, oblivious to the delta's own pharmacopoeia, brimming with potent herbs you explored earlier. Historians still argue whether European crews supplemented their remedies with indigenous cures or remained stubbornly reliant on Old World prescriptions, even as fevers raged and supplies dwindled. You trudge onward kicking aside a splintered wooden barrel hoop, part of a trading cache, or ship storage when Orellana's expedition ran low on provisions. Barrels likely held salted meat and hardtack staples for long passages, yet must have seemed exotic cargo to Delta dwellers, accustomed to fresh fish and manioc fritters. Fringe narratives depict villagers scratching their heads over flavored biscuits that tasted of sawdust and despair. Though some accounts celebrate the novelty as a new snack craze, much like banana chips on modern snack aisles. Historians still debate the extent of dietary exchange. Did locals adopt iron cookware for cassava preparation, or did European tools vanish into the jungle as soon as newcomers departed? As you reach a crumbling embankment, you discover faded red ochre footprints painted on stone, likely left by natives remembering ceremonial markings, yet interpreted by Europeans as signs of pagan worship. Orellana's men wrote of devil marks, warning them away, igniting tales of witchcraft back home. Mainstream interpretations recognize these as clan insignias, marking territorial boundaries. But fringe storytellers still spin dramatic yarns of hidden pagan altars beneath the palms. Historians still argue whether such markings sparked violent skirmishes or merely curious detours, but the clash of worldviews undeniably left a lasting imprint. You pause at the remains of a stone embankment where volunteers theorize a makeshift chapel rose for brief services under palm fronds, an altar of convenience in an unforgiving landscape. They sprinkled earth from home in a small mound reciting Latin prayers for safe passage. Local legends, however, speak of priests of the Delta shamans, who mimicked foreign rituals to negotiate peace, donning makeshift cloth and chanting in unknown tongues to communicate respect. These stories blur truth and myth, yet underscore a shared impulse to find spiritual common ground. Historians still debate the veracity of these diplomatic rituals, but the image of jungle-born liturgies resonates with poetic irony. The current shifts as you step onto a sandbar scattered with broken pottery shards in unfamiliar shapes, clay fragments, likely crafted under European influence, blending Delta designs with Old World motifs. These hybrid pieces reveal early attempts at cross-cultural artistry pottery, painted with both feather patterns and rudimentary Latin inscriptions. Fringe archaeologists muse that some shards bear the first fusion language clay graffiti reading Muerte y Pesca, or live long for cassava, though mainstream experts caution against overreading fleeting scribbles. Historians still argue whether this fusion art flourished or vanished under colonial pressures, but each shard hints at a creative dialogue reshaping two worlds. A sudden overhead screech shatters reverie as an eagle shrieks, diving through vines like an aerial messenger. You imagine it as a spirit guide carrying news between natives and newcomers. Its cry echoing the centuries of communication, some cordial, some fraught with misunderstanding. You tuck the glass bottle and iron ring back into the silt, offering them silently to the river's flow, as if entrusting future explorers the same clues you found. With dawn's glow deepening, you stand by the broad bend, imagining that first trembling handshake between river peoples and ocean wanderers. In your mind's eye, you see two worlds colliding atop these shifting waters, each imprinting tales onto the delta's silt. Historians still argue whether those early meetings paved the way for respectful trade or heralded centuries of upheaval. But today, you can stand where they stood, feeling the same breath of humid air and tasting the same potential for shared destiny. As you push off into the main river once more, the sun breaking above the canopy, you carry that sense of first contact. The wonder. The miscommunication and the fragile promise of connection swirling together like currents meeting at a river's heart. Your paddle dips into the water and you drift onward, tracing the path first. Charted by two very different civilizations, each seeking to make sense of the other in a land of endless green and liquid mirrors. You slip through overgrown palms to reach the skeleton of a once thriving village now claimed by silence and moss. Here you confront the haunting question of why these delta kingdoms fell quiet. Mainstream climatological studies point to shifting weather patterns around 1200 CE, prolonged droughts intermittently starve the waterways, disrupting floodplain fertility and stranding crops. Imagine villagers scrambling to adjust planting schedules as river levels dipped their canoes, grounding on cracked mud instead of gliding through life's lifeline. Yet amid this practical crisis, human nature stirred deeper currents of conflict and resilience. Around you, empty mounds and toppled posts form a ghostly skyline. You spot the faint outline of collapsed granaries, their woven palm walls rotting against the ground. Once brimming with dried manioc and maize, they now cradle only leaf mold. Fringe theories suggest that mass abandonment was triggered not by drought alone, but by an enigmatic jungle fever that drove communities into frenetic flight, leaving behind tools still mid-task and hearthfires smoldering. Stories circulating among local historians whisper of hallucinations induced by toxic, fungal growths on stored grains, turning a simple harvest into a nightmarish pulse of paranoia. Historians still argue whether fungal toxins could reach psychotropic levels, or if these tales emerged later to dramatize an already traumatic exodus. But either way, the idea of mind-bending mycotoxins adds chilling color to the collapse narrative. You stand amid scattered pottery shards and rusted fishhooks, relics of daily life abruptly abandoned. Mainstream archaeological surveys estimate population declines of up to 70% in certain delta sectors during the so-called crisis era. A figure drawn from carbon-dated hearth remains and sediment analyses. You crouch to lift a broken ceramic bowl, running your thumb along its painted rim. Imagine families sharing steamy meals here one evening, then awaking to empty neighbors and no warning drums across the river. The suddenness of it all evokes a collective gasp, as if the delta itself exhaled and let its people slip away. Beyond the granary ruins, you discover a crumbling chamber lined with grids of raised planting beds, an early form of agroforestry that combined manioc with shade trees. Mainstream agronomists praise this technique as a marvel of sustainable design, but drought would have rendered even the most ingenious system vulnerable. Fringe agrarian enthusiasts, however, propose that the bed's very sophistication backfired. Deep-rooted trees carted precious moisture away from shallow-rooted crops, intensifying water stress. Historians still argue whether agroforestry networks were vacated due to natural forces or human mismanagement, yet the conflicting theories underscore how fine the line was between resilience and ruin. As you wander onward, the underbrush gives way to the foundations of a ceremonial plaza, its stones slick with moss. Once this central square hosted rites imploring river gods for fertile floods. Now its altar stands empty, the carved stone basin cracked and dry. You can almost hear the echoes of chant fading into the clamor of wildlife reclaiming space. Fringe oral traditions claim that the final ceremony summoned a deluge so fierce that it drowned the ritual site in an instant, prompting survivors to swear never to return. Historians still debate whether such flood legends encrypt real events or symbolize collective guilt over ecological missteps, but the rumor's resonance hints at a culture wrestling with its own hubris. Across the plaza, you find the remains of a defensive palisade, thick wooden posts, once bristling with sharpened stakes. Mainstream historians interpret this as evidence of inter-village conflict, spurred by resource scarcity, tribes vying for dwindling fish runs and arable land. You can imagine frantic sentries atop elevated platforms, horns sounding muster calls as rival canoes glided toward the riverbank at dawn. Yet fringe conflict theorists propose an alternate scenario: invaders from beyond the delta, perhaps fleeing pressure from upland tribes swept through these waterways, toppling established powers in a whirlwind of violence and cultural exchange. Historians still argue whether external raids or internal strife played the dominant role, but either hands echoes of tumultuous human drama to the silent posts you pass. A sudden rustle in the tall grass brings you back from speculation as a lone peccary scrambles away, reminder that the jungle never truly sleeps. You brush past root-swathed stones and spy a collapsed longhouse frame, its beams strewn like matchsticks across the ground. This communal hall once echoed with storytelling, conflict resolution, and alliance brokering. Now its absence cries louder than any collapse theory. Local lore asserts that elders foreseeing ruin performed a final council beneath these roasted beams before purposefully dismantling the hall, an act of symbolic closure. Historians still argue whether such decommissioning ceremonies occurred or if they're retrospective myths. Yet the image of community leaders dismantling their own temple of governance captures the poignancy of collective endings. Moving deeper, you pass natural springs now, enclosed by makeshift barriers of woven reeds, emergency measures to preserve dwindling freshwater supplies. Mainstream water resource models estimate that even minor shifts in seasonal rain patterns could have spring outputs, forcing desperate inhabitants to ration daily rations to mere liters. Fringe water culture researchers suggest that subterranean channels once tapped to divert excess flows were sabotaged, deliberately collapsed to protect secret water caches. Historians still debate these clandestine hydraulic strikes, but the very notion paints a portrait of a society resorting to covert engineering warfare in its final throes. As the delta's afternoon heat intensifies, you find an abandoned lookout tower atop an earthen mound. From this vantage, you survey a panorama of silent ruins brushing against tangled green. The expanse of earthworks, causeways, and plaza outlines stretches beyond sight, once corridors of life, now corridors of memory. You recall that in the wake of collapse, migrating descendants carried seeds and stories westward, seeding new settlements along the Amazon's main stem. Mainstream genetic studies trace certain crop cultivars back to Delta origins, while fringe linguists argue that dialect fragments in remote communities echo ancient place names preserved in song. Historians still argue whether cultural elements spread primarily through resettlement or trade networks, but the threads of continuity glimmer through the jungle's patchwork. Your feet tangle in trailing vines as you descend the tower's stone steps, each step a chronicle of abandonment and adaptation. The setting sun casts long shadows across fallen beams, making the ruins look like slumbering giants. Fringe poets have compared the landscape to a half-dreamt memory, beautiful yet achingly incomplete. Historians still argue whether such aesthetizations romanticize suffering or honor resilience. Yet the words feel apt here as you brush dust from your hands. In the dying light, you pause to reflect: natural calamity, human conflict, or the whims of disease all likely played parts in this grand unraveling. But no single theory satisfies entirely. Instead, the mosaic of explanations forms a richer tapestry of the Delta's endgame. You stand amid earthen crowns and vine-wrapped columns, letting the unanswered questions swirl around you like restless spirits. You turn away, the weight of hypotheses lightened by the wind at your back. With one final glance at the stacked layers of civilization decomposing into jungle, you step onto a narrow path leading onward, each footfall a reminder that even in absence, these lost cities continue to teach us how fragile and tenacious human societies can be. You push aside a curtain of broad leaves to reveal a cluster of shallow pits rimmed with smooth stones. tropical tombs where delta inhabitants interred their dead with vivid care. These burial pits dating from around 950 CE often held bodies flexed in fetal positions, wrapped in woven mats, and surrounded by jade beads and ceramic offerings. Mainstream osteoarchaeological studies show these grave goods signified both status and hope for an afterlife, with jade's enduring green symbolizing regeneration. You kneel at one edge, imagining mourners lowering their loved ones into the earth, the scent of fresh-cut palm filling the humid air. Scattered around the pits, you find fragments of painted vessels, bowls once brimming with manioc gruel, intended as sustenance for the journey beyond. You brush away moss to expose a nearly intact ceramic dish painted in spirals of ochre and charcoal. Fringe folklore claims that grieving relatives mixed hallucinogenic seeds into the gruel, convincing the departed to drift willingly into nether realms like an eternal river cruise with extra psychedelic sightseeing. Historians still argue whether such mind-altering rituals accompanied burials or remained hypothetical fables spun by later storytellers. But either way, the notion of spirit tripping at rest adds an eerie luster to the scene. A low murmur of insects surrounds you as you circle the pits, and you spot thin, leaf-wrapped bundles tied with bright red vines. Scholars interpret these as bundles of planting seeds, gifts for the dead, so their spirits might cultivate orchards in the afterlife. Mainstream ethno-historical records link the practice to beliefs in ancestral guardianship over crops, ensuring bountiful harvests in the world of the living. You can't help but crack a smile at the thought of ghost farmers pruning ghost papayas, though you'd hate to be the specter sent off to weed invisible weeds. In one pit, you notice a smattering of small jade discs pendants known as water hearts that fringe mystics claim glowed faintly when moonlight struck their polished surfaces. Local storytellers speak of these discs acting as lighthouses for wandering souls, guiding them back home if they got lost amid the underworld's labyrinth. Historians still argue whether the jade pieces served purely decorative or functional roles, or if tales of moonlit glow emerged centuries later as romantic embellishments. But the idea of glowing burial jewelry certainly sparks the imagination. Your foot nudges a broken bone bead necklace, the beads strung on a frayed plant fiber cord. Osteological analysis confirms these beads came from juvenile graves, suggesting children receive similar honors despite high infant mortality rates. You lean closer to examine tooth amulets placed beside a child's skeleton fragments, from first baby teeth saved as protective charms. Fringe anthropologists theorize that these tooth tokens were thought to slow the passage of time for child spirits, granting them an extended childhood in the afterlife. Historians still debate whether such beliefs originated locally or derived from barter exchanges with distant cultures. But the practice of tooth-keeping resonates across human societies with uncanny familiarity. Above the pits, the jungle canopy filters light into shifting emerald mosaics, and you recall that these tombs lay near sacred groves where rituals invoked ancestors' blessings. You spot a ring of charred stones that likely formed a hearth for funerary feasts, the smoky aroma of roasted fish and tubers tantalizing long after the coals died. Mainstream zooarchaeological findings reveal fish vertebrae and turtle shell fragments mingled with ash, indicating communal meals marking the passage of a life, an early version of celebration of life potlucks, minus the Instagram hashtags. Between two burial pits, you find a stone marker carved with a stylized serpent spiraling around a staff, an intriguing symbol that historians still argue whether represents a healing deity or a guardian worm protecting the tomb. Fringe interpretations go further, suggesting serpents guided souls through subterranean river passages, while the staff denotes authority in the afterlife bureaucracy. Whether these symbols guided spirits or signified clan identity remains hotly contested, but the intricacy of the carving hints at profound spiritual architecture beneath the soil. You gingerly touch a slab covering one pit, unsettled by the chill radiating through your fingertips. Underneath a carved lattice grants glimpses of a jade-encrusted skullcap, an elite burial, perhaps of a healer or ruler. Mainstream carbon dating places this interment around 1000 CE, coinciding with the delta's peak population. You picture mourners pressing close to the lattice, whispering prayers through its openings, hoping their words waft into the spirit's eternal ear. Fringe beliefs contend that such lattice work channels earth energies, ensuring the spirit's safe passage rather than trapping them, a tomb that doubles as a spirit router. Historians still debate if this design reflects practical ventilation to prevent decay odors, or a deliberate metaphysical conduit, but either way, the lattice's dual purpose intrigues every angle. A sudden rustle draws your attention to a nearby mound, topped with a solitary ceramic jar painted in black-on-red bird motifs. You pry it open to reveal long decayed textile fragments intermingled with powdered pigments, an offering of personal adornment. Textile experts note that pre-Columbian delta weavings used bark fibers dyed with annatto and indigo, their bright hues symbolizing life's vibrancy even in death. You lift a tiny thread imagining ghosts redressing in ceremonial robes before parading through subterranean palaces, an elegant funeral procession orchestrated by ancestral DJs. Leaning back, you survey the full array of tombs, shallow pits, fenced enclosures of wooden posts, carved into ancestral figures and earthen platforms layered to lift certain graves above floodwaters. Most remain tantalizingly incomplete, perhaps dug hastily during crisis or abandoned mid-rite. Mainstream geologists associate some half-dug pits with rising flood levels, forcing mourners to shift cemeteries uphill, but fringe narratives suggest that floods ever encroaching served as tests where only the most prepared spirits survived the watery trials. Historians still argue whether flooding reshaped burial landscapes or if strategic relocation followed mythic maps passed down through oral tradition. As you rise to leave, you stumble on a chipped stone bowl half buried beside the last pit. When you turn it over, you find a delicate spiral etched on its underside, a miniature echo of the river's flow. You smile at how life, death, and water entwine here. Each tomb sits amid moisture and moss, a reminder that the delta's embrace welcomes both beginnings and endings. You step away from the tomb cluster, pausing to offer a silent thought for those laid to rest. The jungle's distant calls seem softer here, as if honoring the quiet dignity of this burial ground. With one last glance at the jade glimmer and ceramic shards, you let the leafy canopy close behind you, carrying the weight of ancestral reverence as you continue toward the next chapter, where voices of oral histories rise from flickering campfires and echo through time. You settle by a crackling campfire as dusk drapes the delta in shades of violet, listening to local elders spin threads of memory around flickering embers, oral histories carried on the night air like drifting pollen. They speak of ancestral voices echoing through mangrove tunnels, guiding lost souls back to family hearths. Mainstream ethnographers record that storytelling sessions often lasted until the moon neared its zenith, with each narrative layer reinforcing communal identity. You lean in as a griot's voice rises and falls, weaving myth, memory, and moral lesson into a tapestry of sound. In one tale, a legendary hunter named Yawar navigated the delta's labyrinthine channels blindfolded, relying on ancestral whispers to dodge treacherous shoals. Fringe versions add that he was led by the laughter of river dolphins trained to echo-ping his path. Though whether dolphins can perform sonar-guided tours remains debated. Historians still argue whether such legends encoded practical navigation methods or served as fantastical entertainment to keep children enthralled, but either way the story pulses with lesson and wonder. The griot pauses, tossing a green seed into the flames, where it crackles and pops like a tiny firework. He explains that seeds of the sacred Aenocarpus palm were ritually burned to represent the cycle of life and death. each spark a soul's journey to the spirit world. Mainstream researchers confirm that ritual burning of botanical offerings formed a key element in funerary rites, symbolizing transformation and renewal. You watch the sparks rise, imagining them as tethered souls dancing skyward, escorted by silent drumbeats, conjured by unseen hands. Another elder picks up a jaguar tooth necklace, its teeth worn smooth by time. She recounts how these teeth once belonged to Kahi, a revered chieftain whose spirit, they say, still prowls the delta by moonlight. Fringe narrators claim he transformed into a spectral jaguar, patrolling waterways to protect descendants from drowning. Historians still debate whether animal transformation myths reflect shamanic trance practices or allegorical devices illustrating leadership virtues. Yet the jaguar's silent presence under the gleaming stars stirs a tangible chill in the air. A younger storyteller adds a quirky aside that river turtles once served as unwitting historians, carrying carved memory tablets on their shells. According to fringe lore, each tablet recorded lineage for a particular clan, and by touching a turtle's carapace, one could access ancestral counsel. Historians still argue whether such shell-inscribed tablets truly existed or emerged as poetic metaphors for oral transmission. But the notion of shelled libraries gliding through water appeals with its whimsical logic. As the fire's glow softens, you hear debate among elders over whether the great Delta king Ita authored the earliest epics on woven palm leaf scrolls obridos that dissolved when wet, rendering them ghost texts. Mainstream academics remain skeptical of pre-Columbian writing in Amazonia, citing scant physical evidence, yet the possibility of perishable script tantalizes imaginations. Historians still argue whether graphemes once graced palm fronds or if memory alone sustained epic traditions, but the idea of vanished scrolls whispers of lost literary splendor. The rhythmic croak of frogs punctuates the storytelling as the Grand Matriarch recounts a midnight council where spirits of fallen ancestors advised clan elders on flood defenses. Participants draped in woven mantles made of river reeds and painted with charcoal stripes reenacted ancestor dialogues in sacred groves. Fringe reenactors today recreate these enactments for cultural preservation, though some purists argue that any modern revival risks diluting authenticity. Historians still debate how faithfully revived rituals mirror their original forms, but seeing reenactors perform the charcoal-appointed dances under star-swept skies imbues you with reverence. Smoke curls upward, carrying the scent of balsam leaves tossed into the flames to honor departed souls. You catch a faint sweetness like pine mingled with honey, and it stirs memories of your own rituals back home. Mainstream anthropologists note that smoke-cleansing rites appear in cultures worldwide as symbolic gestures of purification. You half-joke that Delta shamans invented aromatherapy long before spa brochures, but beneath the humor lies respect for a tradition that uses scent to bridge realms. The fire dims, and elders begin passing a carved calabash around the circle, each taking a sip of bitter palm wine sweetened with floral nectar. They call it water of remembrance, believing it grants access to ancestral dreams. Fringe stories say that under its influence, dreamers glimpsed future events, a delta prophecy, akin to crystal ball visions. Historians still argue whether such dream rituals held predictive power or served as communal cohesion tools, but you swallow a cautious gulp, marveling as warmth spreads through you and visions of river valleys shimmer behind your closed lids. A hush falls as the calabash makes its way back to the griot, who raises his arms to the moon. He intones a phrase in the native tongue, a summons for ancestors to bless the night's journey. Mainstream linguists have only partially deciphered these ceremonial phrases, citing complex grammatical structures lost to time. You ponder the weight of words once resonant with cosmic significance, but now surviving only in echoing syllables, their original power diffused through centuries. As embers flicker low, a soft chorus of voices hums a lullaby passed from mother to child across generations. The melody weaves through trees like vines, comforting as a rocking cradle. Fringe analysts have speculated that certain lullabies were coded messages instructing children in safe paths through the delta by embedding directional cues in melody. Historians still debate whether lullabies doubled as navigational mnemonics or remained purely soothing refrains, but the idea paints bedtime lore in a fresh light. With the final note of the lullaby, you realize the fire has nearly died. The elders rise in unison, stamping out embers and casting hand-woven blankets over cold stones. Mainstream observers describe such coordinated closure as marking the end of communal ritual space, restoring order to the everyday world. You accept a blanket and feel its rough fibers grounding you back to reality after hours of mythic immersion. As you stand, the night hums around you, crickets, frogs, and the distant drip of water. You brush ash from your pants and thank the elders in your halting native pronunciation, earning gentle smiles. The oral histories have woven a bridge between past and present, giving voice to ancestors whose stones and shells remain silent. You step away from the campfire circle, blanket draped over your shoulders, carrying the cadence of legends and the smoky fragrance of ceremonial flames. In the distance, mound silhouettes fade into moonlit mist. You press on footsteps, quiet on the soft earth, eager to discover archaeological digs, where modern teams unearth new clues, and to witness the debates sparking fresh insights. But for now, the river's hushed lull beckons you onward, where memory and myth converge beneath the canopy's watchful stars. You arrive at a bustling riverside dig, where modern archaeologists in brimmed hats and headlamps sift through delta silt to chase buried foundations. Here, meticulous brushes reveal the contours of long-lost plazas and causeways. Mainstream field reports note that remote sensing surveys, LiDAR, and ground-penetrating radar have uncovered settlements spanning over 50 hectares buried beneath thick canopy for centuries. You step carefully between flagged grid markers, inhaling the scent of wet soil mixed with the tang of industrial-strength sunscreen, a curious contrast of past and present. Ahead, a team leader kneels beside a rectangular trench, gently exposing a row of brick-red pottery shards. She explains that these fragments belong to a previously unknown culture phase, dating roughly between 1100 and 1300 CE, an era colloquially dubbed the Late Delta Flourish. Historians still argue whether this flourish marked a cultural renaissance preceding collapse or represented overreach that hastened decline, but each shard chips away at the silence that has blanketed the delta for a millennium. You crouch beside a volunteer student, carefully lifting a small carved stone disc, its surface etched with concentric rings. Laboratory analysis confirms it as part of a water level gauge used to record seasonal fluctuations, an early hydrological instrument rivaling medieval European water clocks. Fringe engineers marvel at the precision of such devices, proposing that Delta societies quantified river levels to regulate planting schedules with scientific rigor. Historians still debate if these gauges were widespread or experimental prototypes, yet seeing the disk emerge from mud underscores a sophistication often overlooked in Amazonian histories. Nearby, you watch another researcher unearth a cluster of vine-entangled post holes, indicating a longhouse's original footprint. Soil samples taken here have preserved microscopic pollen grains that under lab microscopes reveal a palette of domesticated and wild plant species. This botanical archive corroborates earlier sections on lost orchards, showing that cultivated herbs and food crops thrived side by side, an agroecological harmony only now coming into focus. Fringe paleoecologists argue that some introduced species spread exclusively along ceremonial avenues, suggesting trade routes doubled as botanical corridors. Historians still discuss whether ceremonial and agricultural landscapes were distinct or interwoven, but the pollen whispers of entwined human and plant histories. A crouching specialist taps at a GPS-linked tablet, overlaying collected finds onto a digital map that shimmers with colored dots, each hue denoting artifact type. You squint as the patterns emerge clusters of domestic wares around mound bases, ceremonial items near plazas, and obsidian flakes strewn along water channels. This spatial data underscores how each community organized itself, revealing neighborhood-like sectors in settlements previously thought homogeneous. Historians still argue over interpreting these data layers. Were they class divisions, clan territories, or functional zones? But the map's mosaic transforms abstract arguments into visible terrain. Beyond the grids, a slow-moving excavator delicately peels away centuries of overburden to expose a network of submerged canals. The lead geomorphologist explains these canals once regulated water flow, channeling floods into overflow basins to irrigate nearby fields. Such hydraulic engineering rivals that of Andean terraces and Southeast Asian rice paddies, testament to convergent solutions to similar environmental challenges. Fringe hydraulic scholars speculate that a unified ruling council oversaw water management across multiple polities, hinting at a centralized bureaucracy once thought impractical in dense jungle. Historians still debate whether these projects arose from cooperative alliances or competitive emulation, but every exposed canal bed speaks to communal ingenuity. You wander to a tented lab where pottery fragments undergo a rudimentary reassembly. Volunteers fit shard to shard like pieces of a millennia-old jigsaw puzzle, coaxing broken bowls and figurines back to life. One student holds up a reassembled vessel decorated with stylized bird motifs, each feather meticulously repainted for display. Mainstream curators note, such restoration helps reconstruct artistic traditions, though fringe critics warn that heavy retouching risks misrepresenting original colors. Historians still discuss best restoration ethics, but watching battered shards transform into a coherent piece evokes a quiet thrill. At the edge of the site, you glimpse a line of replica longhouses under construction built using traditional methods demonstrated by indigenous craft instructors. These living history structures allow archaeologists to test hypotheses about building lifespans, maintenance needs, and flood resilience. Fringe experimental archaeologists champion these earthworks in action labs to validate theoretical models, while historians caution that reconstructed sites can romanticize the past. Yet seeing artisans weave palm fronds into roof panels confirms that ancient techniques endure, offering tangible links between ancestral knowledge and contemporary craft. Nearby, a group clusters around a projection screen where a drone's aerial survey unfurls a three-dimensional flyover of the entire delta basin. The shifting perspective reveals hidden causeways crisscrossing fens and forests, paths long obscured by vegetation. Mainstream presentations hail this as a breakthrough, but fringe commentators note that drone surveys may miss smaller features under thick canopy, emphasizing that technology complements rather than replaces ground labor. Historians still debate the balance of high-tech and hands-on methods, but the drone's bird's-eye view already feels like a modern echo of ancient celestial observations. As dusk falls, the dig site glows under floodlights, archaeologists studying by headlamp as the jungle's night chorus begins. You stand amid colleagues from varied disciplines, hydrologists, botanists, anthropologists, each contributing a piece to the delta's puzzle. The interdisciplinary collaboration mirrors the region's historical complexity, societies that blended engineering, art, agriculture, and ritual in seamless integration. Before leaving, you place a small ceramic fragment you found earlier into the site's artifact collection tray, a gesture of solidarity with the ancient artisans whose creations continue to shape our understanding. You brush your hands of clay and ink, the tactile symbols of discovery clinging to your fingertips. Walking away, you glimpse the site's perimeter where temporary fencing encloses a world brought briefly to light. Beyond the barriers lie unexplored mounds still awaiting their turn beneath trowels and brushes promising future revelations. Historians still argue about the delta's chronological frameworks and socio-political structures, but here at the dig site's edge, you feel the pulse of discovery, an ongoing conversation between past and present science and speculation. With the night settling in, you zip up your field notebook and follow the rumble of generators fading into the distance, carrying with you the promise that each new season's digs will peel back another layer of Amazonia's most enigmatic chapter. You pause at the edge of a sunken canal where a half-eroded stone marker stands its surface pockmarked by centuries of rain and root growth. This marker, once gleaming with painted glyphs, now bears only faint traces of its original inscriptions, clues in a contested timeline. Mainstream chronologists date the marker to around 900 CE based on radiocarbon samples taken from nearby organic deposits, suggesting the canal network reached its peak complexity by the 11th century. Yet alternative readings based on pottery styles argue for a later construction closer to 1200 CE, implying a vigorous late Delta flourish rather than gradual decline. Historians still argue whether these waterways belong to an early Golden Age or a swan song of hydraulic mastery, leaving the marker's true era suspended between competing chronologies. A gentle breeze rattles the marker's surface, lifting motes of dust that catch the sun like drifting stars. Fringe epigraphers propose that the original pigments formed a lunar calendar system, aligning monthly festival dates with canal maintenance cycles. Imagine rivers engineered not only for irrigation, but also for ritual timing, an ancient intersection of engineering and ceremony. Historians still debate whether the pigment grooves served as functional calendar tracks or ornamental flourishes celebrating river spirits. Yet the possibility paints the delta's timeline with both utility and mystique. You crouch to examine a set of carved notches along the marker's base, 1, 2, then a series of 24 or so centuries worth of tally marks tracking flood years. Mainstream hydrological models interpret these as seasonal flood records, calibrated to guide planting schedules and communal labor shifts. Conversely, fringe historians argue the notches encoded clan lineages, each mark representing a generation in the lineage of river rulers. Historians still argue whether the marker functioned as a hydrological almanac or a dynastic chronicle. Either interpretation layers meaning onto the worn stone. Further along the canal bank, you find a weathered clay tablet inscribed with overlapping scripts, spiral glyphs mixed with straight-line characters. Mainstream linguists assert this reflects a transitional writing phase where a logographic system merged with early phonetic signs. Radiocarbon dating places the tablet around 1100 CE. Yet stylistic affinities with Highland Andean scripts hint at cultural exchange centuries earlier. Historians still argue whether the phonetic elements represent genuine linguistic innovation or later colonial-era additions underscoring the delta's place at a crossroads of communication. You stand and let your gaze drift downstream, where settlement mounds blur into the horizon. Fringe calendrical theorists suggest that canal alignments correspond to solstice sunrises, embedding astronomical markers into landscape design, a terrestrial observatory in plain sight. Mainstream archaeoastronomers counter that river meanders dictated canal placement far more than any desire to mirror celestial events. Historians still argue whether these alignments were deliberate skywatching statements or accidental byproducts of topographical constraints, But either scenario hints at an interplay between earth and sky that guided ancient planners. A chorus of cicadas hums as you trace the canal's curve, and you recall that similar markers appear along tributaries hundreds of kilometers away, evidence of a shared cultural lingua franca. Mainstream mapping projects chart these markers in a network, suggesting a federated alliance among delta polities. Yet fringe political theorists propose they denote competing spheres of influence, each inscribing canal sections with proprietary symbols. Historians still debate whether the markers signified cooperative infrastructure or boundary disputes, but the conflicting readings reveal how deeply these canals were woven into social fabric. You kneel beside the canal's edge, dipping a finger in its cool water and watching ripples distort reflections of leafy canopies. The water here was once carefully channeled to flow at precise rates timed to calendar cycles that remain debated. Fringe hydraulic reconstructions argue for an advanced timekeeping function, sluice gates operating like clockwork mechanisms. Mainstream engineers caution that evidence for such mechanical gates is scant, favoring simpler open-channel designs controlled by manual removal of debris. Historians still argue whether the Delta's water engineers wielded proto-mechanical sophistication or relied on communal labor to manage flow. But the debate underscores their ingenuity in shaping watery landscapes. As the afternoon light wanes, you rise and brush soil from your knees. The marker's elusive inscriptions seem less an answer than an open question reflecting the broader contest over delta chronologies. You step away, each footfall stirring floating pollen that glints in the dusky glow, reminders that time itself drifts ever onward, shaped by human hands and natural forces alike. Ahead lies the final stretch of your journey through these lost cities. A mangrove-shadowed river mouth where the delta meets the ocean, carrying with it the accumulated whispers of centuries. You push forward, eager to uncover the echoing legacies that ripple beyond contested dates and disputed markers, trusting that each new discovery will sharpen the blurred lines of history just a little more. You glide into the delta's western reaches where tangled mangrove roots form an intricate lattice between land and sea. Each knee-high prop root, a silent sentinel of centuries gone by. Here at the river's mouth, the waters murmur with echoes of vanished empires, remnants of earthen citadels washing into tidal creeks, their stories carried to distant shores. Mainstream oceanographers note that seasonal flood pulses deposit silt-rich sediments here, gradually burying coastal mounds under layers of mud, while fringe geomythologists suggest these sediments serve as nature's time capsule preserving delta legacies in stratified pages of Earth. Historians still argue whether mangrove burial accelerated site loss or acted as protective blankets. But either way, the mud's embrace ensures these cities' traces endure beneath shifting tides. You lean over the canoe's prow to run fingers through silty water, imagining each grain as a fragment of pottery, bone, or carved stone, evidence of lives that rose and fell with the river's rhythm. Local lore insists that mangrove roots once reached into unmarked tombs, twining around jade beads and obsidian flakes, like nature reclaiming both the physical and spiritual remains of its inhabitants. It's an eerie image, trees cradling ancestral treasures in root-wrapped reliquaries, inviting modern seekers to pry them free. Historians still debate whether organic burial under mangroves hindered or helped archaeological preservation. But the metaphor of roots entwined with history resonates with poetic clarity. The horizon widens as you pass a straggling line of eroded mounds protruding from brackish shallows. These vestigial hills, once bustling community centers, now resemble low islands where mud crabs scuttle across shattered pottery shards. Fringe storytellers dub these ghost isles, claiming that at dusk, spectral drums and chanting drift across the water, a final waltz of river ghosts. Mainstream acoustic studies, however, attribute such sounds to tidal flows, whipping through mangrove channels, generating rhythmic booms and sighs. Historians still argue whether ghostly echoes inspired ritual music traditions among present-day Delta communities or simply fueled fishermen's tall tales. But you can't deny the chill when distant sounds ripple under a crescent moon. As daylight softens, you spot a cluster of flattened palms tied in bundles along the bank. Modern offerings laid by local elders honoring ancestral waterways. They place these fronds where old canal mouths once met the sea, hoping to renew bonds between past and present. Mainstream anthropologists recognize this as a form of living heritage practice, a ritual acknowledging the continuity of human-river relationships. Fringe cultural revivalists see it as a reclamation of land rights through symbolic acts, though historians still argue whether such offerings echo pre-Columbian rites or represent syncretic innovations. Either way, the gesture underscores how Delta legacies persist through communal memory and embodied practice. You drift beneath low-hanging branches, their leaves brushing your shoulders like gentle caresses, and recall the countless generations who paddled these same channels. Hunters, healers, traders, rulers, all contributing threads to a tapestry woven by water and earth. Mainstream oral history projects document stories passed in local dialects that mirror those you heard by the campfire tales of river gods, ancestral champions, and epic voyages. Fringe linguists trace these dialects' grammar and lexicon back to Proto-Amazonian roots, suggesting a remarkably stable linguistic heritage. Historians still debate whether these languages evolved in situ or spread through waves of migration, but each spoken word carries an echo of Delta cities long submerged. Further on, you see a lone fisherman casting nets from a narrow canoe, his lamp lit against approaching dusk. His silhouette against the silvery water reminds you that life here endures in rhythms established millennia ago, catching fish by moonlight, sharing stories at dawn, tending fields in the floodplain's ebb and flow. Mainstream studies of contemporary Delta livelihoods reveal that many families still plant flood recession crops and practice rotational fallow patterns mirroring ancient agroforestry techniques. Fringe economic anthropologists argue that a direct continuum links pre-Columbian production systems to modern subsistence strategies, but historians point to colonial disruptions and adaptive resilience muddying the direct lineage. Regardless, the fishermen's steady motions evoke cycles of adaptation and continuity. A gust of brackish breeze carries the faint scent of sea salt mingled with river mud, a poignant reminder that the Delta's heart always pulses between fresh and salt water. You pause as a wave laps against your hull, thinking of how those ancient architects balanced earthworks with hydraulic mastery mounds engineered to rise above floods canals, calibrated to channel excess flows and plazas, aligned to sky cycles. Now mangroves dictate the pace, their breathing routes tracking tides rather than monsoons. Historians still argue whether mangrove expansion contributed to Delta city abandonment or simply redefined landscape usage. But you sense an overarching theme dynamic adaptation in a mutable world. Night descends gradually, lantern stars flickering overhead while the last hues of sunset fade to indigo. You steer toward a cluster of exposed roots, where a weather-beaten wooden plank bears faded red ochre, probable remnants of ancient dock structures. Each sliver of wood, each trace of pigment, links you to builders whose labor and creativity shaped Delta civilizations. Mainstream conservationists plan submerged archaeological surveys to document these timbers before they vanish below silt, while fringe preservationists advocate for in-situ protection, erecting floating platforms to shield fragile remains. Historians still debate the ethics of excavation versus preservation, but the debate itself testifies to ongoing engagement with Delta legacies. You drift one last time into a widening estuary, where river and sea meld into a silken expanse. The water's surface reflects scattered moonlight like 1,000 tiny mirrors, each glint a whispered memory of the lost cities you've traversed. In that gentle glow, the delta's echoes converge the artistry of pottery, the precision of canals, the solemnity of tombs, the warmth of stories, and the quiet persistence of nature reclaiming human creations. Though mud and water may obscure physical traces, the human spirit that shaped those cities endures in local customs, scholarly debates, and your own wonder-filled journey. As you lean back, paddle resting across your lap, you realize that these echoing legacies ripple outward into academic discourse, into cultural practices, and into every person who pauses to listen to the river's stories. The Delta cities may lie hidden beneath sediment and roots, but their whisper persists, a testament to humanity's capacity for innovation, adaptation, and storytelling in harmony with water's ever-changing flow. Your paddle rests quietly on the canoe's edge as the world softens into gentle murmurs. The river's breath becomes a hushed lullaby, carrying you between realms of memory and possibility. Breathe deeply. Now feel the cool air settling into your lungs, each inhale drawing in the delta's ancient calm, each exhale releasing any tension you've carried along this journey. Let your shoulders drop and your jaw unclench as the twilight envelops you in a soothing embrace. Imagine the water's surface beneath you, smooth as glass, reflecting moonlight in slow-moving ripples. Notice how each tiny wave feels like a whispered goodnight from centuries past. A reminder that though worlds shift and stones crumble, history's resonance thrives in moments like this. Allow those soft reflections to cradle your mind, guiding you toward restful stillness. The canopy above rustles in a lullaby of leaves, each whisper a gentle nudge guiding your thoughts into a tranquil drift. Let go of restless questions and unanswered debates. Entrust them to the river's depths where time flows unhurried and past and present merge into a seamless current. With every gentle splash against the hull, feel yourself release the day's cares. In this fading light, know that you carry the Delta's legacy within you. Its lessons of resilience, adaptation, and reverence for nature's rhythms. As your eyelids grow heavy, imagine soft clay under your hands, mossy stones beneath your feet, and the river's timeless song echoing through your dreams. Trust that tomorrow you'll awaken renewed, carrying the river's calm forward into your waking hours. Now, let the gentle dark settle fully around you. Rest in the delta's whispering hush and drift into sleep on the soft current of history's embrace.